Hi, Adam Keeley here. I felt like doing an unscripted video about my lived experience of Teal, Swan. If you don't know anything about me, I like to tell people, now that I know about it, that I had an undiagnosed childhood brain injury. I started gathering evidence that this happened about 5 years ago from a specific test at the eye doctor, and it shows that, among other evidence, that I hit my head hard enough when I fell off the trampoline at 5 years old that I have some high-level brainstem damage to the cerebellum and the pons. And earlier this year I found the specific diagnosis called cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, which can be similar to autism. I met Teal Swan when she visited the restaurant I work at. She was in an absolutely gorgeous jacket of what I can only assume is one of her paintings, and I sensed something special about her and didn't know how to express it. I stuck to my script that I use at work to serve customers, and paused after she left the store to try to recognize that feeling I had, bookmark it, if you will, and I believe it was shortly thereafter I rediscovered her videos on YouTube. I was told about her videos and shown one or two of them about a decade ago by my abusive family of origin. This was when her television interview was actually broadcast up in Idaho. I was so focused on resisting woo-woo stuff like crystals and energy work that I didn't see the value in it. I couldn't recognize the good impression she made, nevertheless. And the broadcast was more of a rumor in my environment of my abusive family of origin, talking about negative perception of the Mormon cult that they belong to. My father spanked me, physical abuse. I was literally dragged to church when I showed some resistance to this indoctrination. About 6 years ago, I went no contact with my mother and anyone in her orbit because my mother actually physically tortured me while I was growing up as the son of a LDS seminary teacher. She tortured me immediately after I hit my head and went to her for help, trying to figure out what was going on and get assistance for what I thought was a normal, painful accident. Although I remember seeing a flash of white light when I hit my head, indicating the neurological damage. So I had refused to go on a Mormon mission for the cult. They called me to the Chicago North mission, and I said all the things I was supposed to, that I was worthy and all that culty stuff, and focusing on the cause instead of the symptom, really. I've been feeling great about piecing together this narrative of who Teal Swan is that seems like it should have been easy perhaps for someone without brain damage. Her presence in my life surprisingly goes back all the way to infancy. This cult sexually molested me as what I believe was a form of controlling Teal's public image and any potential she had. The imprint that I had on her eyes sort of survived the brain damage because she made a really good first impression with her videos, and with myself being unaware of the brain injury, I feel now in hindsight I stuck around with my abusive family of origin far too long. I was sexually molested in an LDS church building as an infant in what is my best understanding of some strange continuation or variation of the baby Albert, I believe it's called, experiment, where they forced an infant to become scared of small fluffy animals or stuffed animals, and they forced me to imprint on her friendly eyes. I first remembered it as possibly a playmate across the room, and I was interrupted to go join this playmate and just be spontaneous, and they forced me to imprint in a positive way on her compared to what was going on in the moment, in a reversal of the little Albert experiment, where they caused a negative association with an animal that the infant was initially unafraid of. They forced him to create a negative association. And so I got this early impression of Teal Swan's eyes, and that impression survived the brain damage until later in my 20s. My brother showed me her videos on YouTube. I believe this is because of their belief in some kind of soul. They wanted to create a dichotomy between the male and female in line with their cult teachings of the eternal progression of a male and female soul to become like God and get married and live with their multiple wives in the celestial kingdom. My father was an LDS seminary teacher. This cult is very disturbing, and I remember being in the nursery and taken to the restroom, and there's a connection with a photograph of somebody's eyes, and it can only be Teal Swan's eyes that somebody was trying to condition me with, is my best understanding of my lived experience. They were trying to condition me in some sort of sick twist on the little Albert experiment to see how far that classical conditioning can go. I believe Teal knows exactly how to handle the situation, that she is nothing like these cult members, the people who abused me and who have this end of days narrative of secret combinations, that there's like secret plans and cabals of people that are specifically supernaturally working with the forces of evil. There are certainly terrible people in the world, and I've done my best to put them out of my life, like people like my mother. And it's very difficult in my experience to go no contact. I was abused before and after my brain injury, and it became something I couldn't even think about, truly. I have a scar on my thumb. Right there. There you go. And another one on my palm. from my mother throwing the keys into my palm so forcefully that it left a scar. So I just still hadn't connected it to my abusive childhood and actually acting on my lived experience with people in my life. It feels like people who have a negative opinion of her are missing information and missing a way to synthesize it in the way that I struggle to with my brain injury. So I wanted to share this. These terrible people have an active element of controlling other people and forcing lies, like the lie that I caught my thumb in the spring of the trampoline instead of my mother physically torturing me with cuticle scissors when I went to her for help after the brain injury, after I had a flash of white light indicating the neurological damage. So there was no scientific basis of understanding my brain injury at the time. It was described by Dr. Schmaumann 2 years later, and she just twisted a accident into her own narrative and control of the family and me. And that's really about it. I feel very inspired by Teal, despite no direct responses to my emails, and perhaps that's for the best. Have been emailing her anything I can think of that might be helpful. And I believe that things will be alright. Thank you for your time. It's just the narrative I have is I had that conditioning forced on me as an infant, and my mother caused that scar on my thumb immediately after I hit my head and ran to her for help. I was the third boy that she had, so I personally believe she's a psychopath that can't accept men, that doesn't believe men are separate beings, is my best way to describe it. She took cuticle scissors and dug into this thumb immediately after I was trying to figure out what was happening from bruising my brainstem, that she dug in until I just collapsed and just I had a dream that night that everyone turned into dinosaurs, adults first, and then I turned into a T-Rex. So in my mind, that's supportive of her archetypal understanding of men as dangerous, or they have to be controlled or something, that it really wasn't my fault at all. I was 5 years old. I didn't know what was going on. And the scientific framework for describing my type of brain injury wasn't put forward until 2 years later. So it's a lot to process, and a therapist helped a lot. 5 years ago, I had a therapist and talked to her about a lot of stuff, and I was sexually molested in an LDS church building as some sort of twisted version of the little Albert experiment. They cannot accept or support any sort of gender, identity, or modality, because that's what the doctrine says. So I was sexually molested while being forced to imprint on Teal's friendly eyes with a photograph of her. She said she did modeling work at that young age, and I was the third boy of a psychopathic mother, so I think members of the cult saw this and recognized this in my mother. So these disturbing hidden elements of the cult that I believe are still active to this day. Culty stuff like blood atonement. She has been very inspirational. I am the social solar eclipse. It's unfortunately deeper than even that. These cult members are so disturbing, starting with my own mother. After I hit my head, I ran to her for help, and she just literally physically tortured me because I woke her up from her nap. I don't know, she had the day planned out. She was smarter than toddlers. She wasn't expecting it. It's bizarre. She took cuticle scissors and she gashed my thumb. Gashed my thumb until I physically collapsed because I didn't know what I was trying to communicate. I just had a painful accident. I didn't have any concept of it extending to permanent, lifelong, abstract brain damage. And it feels like the easiest way to communicate this experience is to call her a psychopath. Because later, I tried to have my own autonomy and do what was best for me. In a similar way, she threw the keys so hard into my palm, she left another scar. I immediately recognized something was different and remember her beautiful jacket that I can only assume was printed with one of her paintings that she was wearing. And after I followed the script for working in a fast food place, serving the customers, I had to pause after she left the building to kind of bookmark that feeling that something unique had happened. And it was shortly after that I rediscovered her videos on YouTube and figured out a lot more about my history with the Mormon cult that I was forced to grow up in. And if you'll hear me out, and if you believe me, you can start to understand why. My parents are both indescribably, irredeemably evil. One's a sociopath, one's a psychopath, if I can use those words as the closest approximations of my experience. My mother, the psychopath, is the worst one. She physically tortured me with cuticle scissors, cutting deep into my thumb with the cuticle scissors after I ran to her for help, trying to describe and remedy an accident from falling off the trampoline when I was 5 years old. I suffered a brain injury that day, a high-level damage to my spinal cord that's now called cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome by Dr. Jeremy Schmahmann, who described it about 2 years after my accident in 1996. So, in a similar vein to being dragged off to church, I think only my father was there that day. I tested resistance to my mother later when I tested it again when I was a teenager. I didn't want to run an errand for her, so she threw the keys to the car so forcefully into my palm that she left another scar. And so she got to stay home from church that day, I believe. And it's difficult to know where I'm going with this being unscripted, and so rediscovering Teal's videos has been great. She's very inspirational, and I got some tattoos I designed myself. Partially from inspiration from her alchemy stuff is what I focused on and drew inspiration from, particularly with the one on my back. And I rediscovered her videos because my abusive family of origin pointed them out to me for unknown reasons about a decade ago when her television interview aired in Idaho. And her videos made a good impression, but I overlooked it because of the social environment I was in. And I hope I'm doing better and perhaps even rectifying that oversight with this video. And the thing is that I had a undiagnosed childhood brain injury, so I hit the back of my head so hard when I fell off the trampoline at 5 years old that I've suffered lifelong consequences in some of the most abstract ways that we use our minds. I have gone no contact with my abusive family of origin. They as far as I'm concerned, are irredeemably evil. I will never accept their presence in my life voluntarily. I have a disturbing memory of being sexually molested in an LDS cult building. They actually call it a meeting house. Calling it a church is a misnomer if you know enough about the doctrine. So this hidden blood atonement cult side of the Mormon cult is still very much active in my lived experience. They are satanic, like my mother's response to my brain injury. I rushed to her for help after I hit my head, and she used cuticle scissors to dig into my thumb so deep that I collapsed. I had to accept anything that she did after that, really. And she said that I caught my thumb in one of the springs that goes around the edge of the trampoline. So she was psychopathically trying to figure out a story that was close enough without any empathy at all, just controlling the narrative. The eye test that I got 5 years ago showing the brainstem damage is just explains a lot. I'm not sure where else to go with this video. My father was a sociopathic LDS seminary teacher. He can't function without this framework where everyone has a script, really. So that framework, coupled with my mother's psychopathic control, was just such an evil environment to grow up in. The one time I felt brave enough to challenge her later, when I was a teenager, I had just learned to drive. She so forcefully threw the keys into my palm that she left another scar because I didn't want to do an errand for her convenience. And oh, she couldn't even stick with the lie that I had caught my thumb in one of the springs of the trampoline. She has a similar scar, creepily enough, on her thumb that she got from reaching into a trash can with a piece of glass. And so she couldn't even remember the lie she told about my thumb. She just made it all about her. Because I said I didn't remember where I got this scar when she brought it up out of the blue. And I've gone no contact with my family of origin. Anyone in the orbit of my mother is how I think about it. So they will never voluntarily be a part of my life again. They have ignored and abused me to I've been nearly destroyed by this cult. Trying to figure out what's acceptable private behavior and having a public moving forward energy at the same time is has been unmanageable without the new information that I have of the undiagnosed childhood brain injury. Nothing makes sense in my life without this diagnosis, and I still doubt myself a lot, wondering if Teal visiting my restaurant was actually a fan of hers wearing one of her jackets. And I've emailed her telling her everything I can to try to be helpful and just express my narrative and my truth. I haven't received any direct response. it was shortly thereafter that I rediscovered her videos on YouTube and emailed her all I could about anything I could think of that could be helpful or relevant to our time here in this world. And I rediscovered her videos because my abusive family of origin pointed her out to me over a decade ago when her television interview was aired in Idaho on the news, and she made a great impression on her YouTube videos. I never saw the interview until recently. I didn't know it could be the same person, and maybe that was part of the Mormon cult testing if I had a connection or knew of anything going on. They have this doctrine of rumors and secret combinations, secret plans going on in their end of the world, end of days scenario. This experience of Teal and my entire life is complicated by the fact that I had an undiagnosed childhood brain injury where I hit the back of my head falling off the trampoline. This brain damage was measurable by an eye doctor 20 years later. I was first introduced to Teal's videos more than a decade ago when her interview was aired in Idaho about satanic ritual abuse. And unfortunately, her story overlaps with my experience of the Mormon cult. My abusive family of origin pointed out her videos. I didn't see the interview being aired, but it was part of the discussion, part of the rumors, if you will, of my experience at the time. And her videos made a good impression on me, and I couldn't recognize that impression because I was resisting the cult instead of actually putting up boundaries in my life. I was resisting and trying to describe the woo-woo nonsense of the whole situation, which apparently isn't a good approach. You gotta deal with first things first, and abstract history and doctrine isn't helpful with an abusive family of origin, then her approach and great first impression stuck with me, and I think she has great boundaries about what she can control, about the impression she makes on other people, and their response to her. I've found her very inspirational with this new conscious understanding. Even just meeting her for less than 5 minutes in a public setting. Sorry, I get distracted easily, and it's been great to rediscover Teal and email her anything I think could be helpful. It seems like what she's gone through shows this dark side of the Mormon cult, the blood atonement doctrine, and these secret combinations, these secret plans that they have, that they imagine are going on in their end of days narrative, that all cults have of this end of the world thing. So it's feels kind of dangerous to speak out about it, that there's these disturbed people that that do these things and take advantage of brain injured people like me. They my experience with these cult-like elements goes all the way back to infancy, because Teal was doing child modeling work at the time when I was an infant in 91 or 92, so I remember somebody forcing me to imprint on her friendly eyes. Somebody was holding up a picture of her eyes. At first I thought it was like a playmate across the room, but I have a disturbing memory of being sexually molested for this cult ideology. I don't know what their motives were for doing this. It might be related to their teaching that men and women have these different souls, and there's no room for gender identity or modality in this cult. They all I can say is I'm just glad they are out of my life and I can express myself how I'd like to. Since I have a undiagnosed childhood brain injury that I only discovered 5 years ago and only found a specific diagnosis earlier this year, I have never connected these things into a narrative of this person, and she has become inspirational to me, and I think it's independent of people detracting or projecting onto her. In my experience, her public facing persona has been used against her entire life,